This is Dorie Clark. I am so happy to be here on behalf of Newsweek. This is our weekly interview show, Better. And today we are here with Jeffrey Shaw. Jeff is the author of the new book, The Self-Employed Life. And we are going to be talking about how to be self-employed, or at least think like you are. Jeff, welcome.
Oh, thanks, Dory. It's always great to be here with you. And I love the idea of not just being self-employed, but also thinking like you are. So great theme.
Excellent. Well, you are the expert at it, my man. So we are interested in hearing your best advice. And if you are tuning in live, please feel free to type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you are watching from. We want to hear your thoughts and get your questions for Jeffrey Shaw. So, Jeff, the first question that I have, obviously, during COVID, there has been a lot of self-reflection, a lot of self-examination that people have done. Many people might be thinking about making changes, including perhaps becoming self-employed. In fact, I recently wrote a piece in the Harvard Business Review about what to do before you quit your job, because so many people are perhaps thinking about that. If that is on someone's mind, if they're thinking, maybe this is the time to become self-employed, talk to us a little bit about that process. How does someone go about actually determining whether it might be the right move for them?
Yeah, I have to check out that article because I actually just recently created a tool, and I look at it as a tool because one of the most common questions I get asked is, what should I do when? And I have my own LinkedIn live show is specific. It's called From Corporate Life to Self-Employed Life, specifically to help people that might be considering leaving their corporate job for self-employed. Because I agree with you 100%. I mean, who isn't reflecting on their life right now? Who isn't considering the changes they want to make? So while I wrote my book, The Self-Employed Life, for people who are already in business, I started it before COVID. Once COVID hit, I realized there now is going to be a massive number of people that will become self-employed, perhaps out of need, those that lose their job. Once the book was out, I then realized that there's also a huge number of people that, quote unquote, are lucky enough to still have their job, but are realizing it's not fulfilling them, it's not making them happy. They may choose to become self-employed. So there's layers to this, and without a doubt, every trend is showing that self-employment is dramatically on the rise. And I think by 2030, it's estimated 50% of the US population will be self-employed. So how to go about, I think it depends on the stage you're coming from. So if you are in fact currently employed, thinking this might be a more fulfilling way to live, one thing is to give yourself as much runway as possible, right? The timeline I created is a 12-month timeline. But I'm very careful to say in there that, hey, if you don't have 12 months, you may just have to simultaneously knock off some of these steps at the same time because you may not have as long of a runway. I'm a huge proponent of a safe leap. I know we have a lot of motivational speakers that are all about just tearing off the Band-Aid.
God help us.
Right, exactly. But you and I both know, and the majority of people that are really doing amazing things in the world, most of us are of an age where we already have lives in motion. Let's not destroy the lives in motion. So things to consider. Let me look at it this way. Here's one thing to not stress about so much that I think people stress about way too much, which is don't try to figure out exactly what it is that you're going to do. I think our instinct is don't let go of the job until I know exactly the type of business I'm going to create, until it's perfect, until I'm ready. The fact of the matter is, where you end up, and every self-employed person I've asked, like, does your business today look anything like your original idea? Everybody says no.
Well, even your business, Jeff, you were just telling me that you've launched a new program and you are years into your not only your self-employment, but your work as a coach and a consultant.
Yeah. And I started out as a photographer, right? It's like we almost forget that whole, 37 years ago and still doing it today, I started as a photographer. So if you had asked me, honestly, if you even asked me 15 years ago, why were you on this planet? I would have thought, I'm on this planet to be a photographer. I mean, we just can't imagine the iterations that we are going to go through. And what has helped me a lot is to look at it as almost like beta versions. I look at myself now as Jeffrey 4.0. Like I'm on this fourth stage. this one, I believe, around the topic of self-employment is one I plan on really sinking my feet into and staying with. And I'm at a point in life now that this could be my longest runway and just stick with it. But I think where a lot of people get hung up is thinking they have to know exactly what this business is going to look like. And the fact of the matter is, have an idea, create a structure and a format around it. Make sure it's, you have an inkling of it being marketable, but just get it in motion, because it's the motion part that will bring about so much more clarity that you just can't possibly imagine right now. And I think a lot of people get hung up there.
That's great advice, Jeff. Thank you. And I just want to greet some of the terrific folks who are tuning in to join us live. We have Karen from Boston. Cheryl is here from Minneapolis, St. Paul. Carlos is here from Columbia. He's a fan. He says, I read Jeffrey's book recently. It's totally worth the time. So thanks for that, Carlos.
Thank you.
Sarah is here from Schenectady, and Todd from New York. We have Deb from Cincinnati, and David from Indianapolis. So lots of great folks. Please feel free to type your questions for Jeffrey Shaw into the chat box. We'd love to take them. So, Jeff, another question that I'm curious about. One of the objections, I guess, that some people have to being self-employed, or at least a concern, is that they are concerned about stability. They say, oh, that would be great. The autonomy would be great. But of course, there is the lure of the safe day job. How do you create stability for yourself when you are self-employed?
Yeah. Well, for one, I think stability in a traditional job is a myth, right? And maybe it's just ingrained in my soul. I mean, I've actually never had a traditional job of any kind. Like, I've never received a paycheck. So this is all I know. But I'll tell you, I mean, I look at it as having the control of your own life is far more stable to me than that feeling that the rug can be pulled out from underneath you at any time. So I think one is to reframe, like, what really is stability? I mean, I think just getting a paycheck and having a job isn't, of course, what creates the most anxiety for people around stability is money. So again, going back to the runway, if you're thinking about becoming self-employed, how much financial runway can you give yourself? Ideally, particularly if you're leaving a corporate job, 18 months is a great sweet spot. I know some people only feel comfortable if they have 2 years. 18 months, I think, is ideal. Reason being is that gives you the freedom when you're starting out to say the first year is your journey back to a level of income that may or may not match what you're leaving, but to a point of sustainability. So that's your 1 year goal, which means you now have 6 months. If you've met that goal, you now have 6 months of a buffer, which is a great way to operate a business, to have 6 months of cash flow, which is more than most businesses have, truthfully. Your average restaurant, by the way, has 3 weeks of cash flow.
Yeah, no wonder COVID was a problem.
Which is why they go under so quick. I'm down here in Miami. When Zika virus hit a few years ago, restaurants are closing right and left because they only have 3 weeks of cash flow. 6 months is ideal. 3 months is doable. And so one of the ways you can create stability is to give yourself some foundation of it, because that's what creates everybody the most anxiety. I mean, most people are going to venture into self-employment have the characteristics, the resilience within themselves. It's the financial piece, I think, that creates the most anxiety. The other thing you can do is, again, particularly if you're leaving a job, tick off all the boxes you can. Like, it's so practical, but get while you have health insurance that somebody else is paying for, get every medical appointment imaginable out of the way on somebody else's dime, right? Right. So that's one of those things I teach my timeline, like 12 months ahead of time, just start checking off those boxes. So I think the stability is, most people have the character and resilience to handle the roller coaster. It's the financial piece, I think, that gives people most anxiety. So give yourself as much reserve as you can. COVID was a really great example of that. I said COVID was my third rodeo, because my business was in New York during 9/11, the recession. So this time around, the number one thing I try telling people is buy time, because this is going to be here for a while. And I didn't think it would be around as long as it has been, but initially thinking, figure out how you can get by for 7 months. I'd hoped it would pass in 7 months, but it's like, just buy time. So the more you can have financial reserves, the more time you can buy yourself. Even if you have, honestly, if you have 3 months of reserves, you can stretch everything else out another 3 months. Like you can buy yourself a good 6 to 9 months of time before you really feel like and you're going to recover by then. You just are. So that's, I think, how to even out the ups and downs.
Yeah, that's really powerful, Jeff, and I certainly agree. When I started my business 15 years ago, I had a 3-year goal for myself, and the year one goal was don't go bankrupt. Year two was replicate my previous salary, which I worked in a nonprofit, so it was not impressive. And then year three goal was 6 figures, and that was how I mapped it out.
Yeah.
But sort of having a realistic set of expectations. And fortunately, I was able to exceed that with my pacing.
But of course,
but just yes, knowing
you're Dorie.
Oh, thank you. Yes, succeeding and not going bankrupt. That was very good. But it's all about the low bar. In fact, in my first book, Reinventing You, I tell the story of a woman named Patricia Fripp, who's a professional speaker. I'm actually in San Francisco right now, which is where she's based. And she was originally a hairdresser, and she made a transition over a 10-year period to being a professional speaker, which is kind of a big leap, a big transition. But because she gave herself such a long runway, she was able to reinvest her profits from her salon into building her career as a speaker. And ultimately, when she shut down the salon 10 years later and handed over her keys, there was no transition whatsoever. She was able to saunter into her new career. So I think that what you're saying is really valuable. And just want to say hi to some of the great folks who are tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us. We have lots of folks who are echoing your wisdom. Sonia says, I quit my job in May 2021 and work for myself now. I decided last year if it doesn't bring me joy or make me happy, I won't do it. Jeff is speaking facts. So yay, Sonia.
Thank you, Sonia.
That's wonderful. Now, Jeff, a question came in from our friend Annette. Annette is in California, and she wants to know, when you're working for yourself, how do you find thought partners to complement your capabilities and your gaps? What does that process look like for you, Jeff, or how would you advise others?
I love that. So, there's the adage, you are the culmination of the 5 people you hang around with. And that's true. I think there's diversity in the group, right? So, who's your cheerleader, right? Who's the person that is always going to tell you, go Annette, who's your cheerleader? And who's your kick in the ass partner? I've got a Leslie M in my life. Like Leslie sets me straight. And because we know when we're whining, we know when we need the kick in the ass, who do you call upon to do that for you? So I think it's a diverse range of personalities. You want to have, some of the smartest people, to me, Dorie, you're like that. One of those people for me. It's like, you're one of the most clear thinking, brilliant, strategic minds I know of. So, I turn to you for strategic advice. Who do you turn to for the cheerleading? Who do you turn to? So I would have a diverse group of people. The quote, and Jim Rohn's one of my heroes and idols. And so I love the idea that you are the culmination of the 5 people you hang around with. But I think what's lost in that idea is that there's supposed to be 5 like-minded people. I think a better way to go about it is to have kind of a board of directors, if you will. I actually call them a band of angels, right? I kind of surround myself with this band of angels that each play a little bit of a different role, right? The strategic thinker. I've, somebody else in my life that has a way of cutting to the chase. Like when I'm kind of lost in the weeds, like somehow she can see right through it all and cuts right to it and says, booms, So stack your list with people that can give you the different pieces. Because that's one of the biggest challenges of being self-employed is that we're already wearing multiple hats. Let's not make that into multiple personalities. So have the personalities around you for the fill the piece. And as far as on a more practical sense, yes, we want to have people in our job, in our businesses that fill our gaps. I tend to, as a personality and focus on my clients a little bit more on how can you also strengthen your strengths. I think we're always looking for somebody to fill the gaps in our business that we perceive as a gap. But just, by the laws of the laws of gravity, like something in motion stays in motion. So I also think it's a good idea, which I actually get more yards. Like, what are my strengths? What am I personally really good at? Who can I partner with that can run with that? I find there's more speed to that. So I wouldn't always focus on closing the gaps, but also look, where can you partner with somebody that throws more fuel on the fire, because that's actually going to result in more momentum.
That's such an interesting point, Jeff. Thank you for sharing that. And we have been talking with Jeffrey Shaw. He can be reached at jeffreyshaw.com, and he's the author of the new book. It's called The Self-Employed Life. If you're enjoying this conversation, please go ahead and visit my website, dorieclark.com. You can sign up for my newsletter there, download a self-assessment. You'll be added to our newsletter list, and you will get reminders so you never miss one of these weekly Newsweek sessions, which take place at noon Eastern and 9 a.m. Pacific on Thursdays. So, Jeff, we have some great questions that have been coming in, and one that I think is quite salient comes from Costa Rica. Kenya is tuning in, and she wants to know, how do you deal with setbacks if the self-employed strategy actually doesn't work out? She says there's a lot of pressure from family that if you're risking so much by going into work for yourself, it has to work. How do you deal with setbacks or the expectations of family members that might be a little bit skeptical of this?
Yeah. I think, Kenya, the best way I can answer that, and I've asked, I can't even, countless number of self-employed people, regardless of everything they ever went through, would you go back? Would you do it and everyone's answer is, I wouldn't have it any other way. Always, almost verbatim, those are the words, I wouldn't have it any other way. So what that tells me that I can offer to you, Kenya, is no matter what you have to go through, the chances are, whether it's 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, it's probably 3 to 5 years when you also will say, yeah, but I wouldn't have it any other way. It's almost hard to put words to it. When I ask people why they went into business themselves, the number one answer is they want control. And that's actually a big cornerstone of my book. And I talk about this like right in the earlier pages. The number one reason somebody becomes self-employed is they want control. The problem is that idea of control is actually a myth of self-employment, because when you become self-employed, it feels nothing like control, right? But what I teach in the book, the fundamental lesson of the book, is that you can't control the circumstances. You can't control the economies. You can't control, now we know we can't control a pandemic. The one thing you can control are the circumstances you set up for the results that you want. That you can control, right? You can absolutely control the environment, the ecosystem for the results you want. And then there's almost a little bit of a letting go process, because you can't control the response or results of that. But in doing so, you've given something your all. And if you've given something your all, it's pretty hard to be self-critical of it. And you know that. Like, when you've given something your all, you're not going to riddle yourself with questioning yourself. As far as family members, to this day, I've been self-employed, well, actually my whole life, but professionally speaking, 37 years. And to this day, I don't think my mother knows how I make a living or pay my bills. Like, I still don't think she gets it. In fact, she asked me recently, where exactly does your income come from? I think she understood it more as a photographer, even though she didn't understand the whole, how can you make money taking pictures? She's even more confused now. So, that's probably always going to be there. And you have to do what's right for you. For me, the number one reason why I'm self-employed, and I say this often, is every business decision I've ever made in my life is based on how I want to live my life. I live in Miami because I came here for a winter, 3 months, and never left, right? Because I realized this is how I wanted to redesign my life. That, to me, is why ultimately you say I wouldn't have it any other way, because while you don't have control of the circumstances, the ability to design your life the way you want to, you almost can't put words to it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jeff. That's really great. And I'm seeing a popular theme emerge here. Todd has a question, and it's one that's echoed by Marion. Todd, who was just shortlisted for the Thinkers 50 Leadership Award. Congrats, Todd.
Congrats. Wow.
Yes, Todd wants to know, what are your tips, Jeff, for prioritizing and focusing when working for yourself can become a 24-hour-a-day obsession? Well, we certainly know that's true. How do you prioritize, Jeff, and how do you stop at least after hour 23?
Yeah. Um, Bucket things. I mean, that's my answer. Like I'm a big believer in bucketing your calendar. Like I'm really, really strict on the times of day I do certain things. My morning routine is even before I start my workday is ground in stone. I also, yes, we are going to be, it's naturally self-obsessive. Again, I'm always hesitant to say that when you're self-employed, and this is often misinterpreted, when we're self-employed, we all know that there's no line between your personal life and your business, right? We know that. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a line in as far as how much you work. What I most mean when I say that there's no line between your business life and your personal life is that who you are is reflected in your business and vice versa. So it's always on your mind. So I think one thing to do is to structure your day. And I'm very, like I said, I do coaching calls from 10 to 12. I take an hour off from lunch. I do coaching calls from 1 to 3. From 3 to 6:30, I write content, whether it's a book, articles. That's my work day. Prior to then, I've been up since 6 a.m. and, I read for an hour every morning. I take my dog for a walk. I make my chai tea. I do 45 minutes of exercise. So from 6 to 10, even before I even make my first phone call, even that's all really structured. I end my day 6:30 with a 4-mile walk. And I call it a bookend, right? So that's a definitive line. So there's a bunch of lines, and I'm going to come home and I'm going to sit and watch the Golden Girls with my laptop on in front of me. I know it, right? So I'm going to continue working. Another tip I would give is to have ways to get things out of your head as easily as possible. The fact of the matter is, you're going to be thinking about your business when you're at your kids' ball games or doing something recreational. I kayak a lot. And I know all these ideas are going to come to me when I kayak. So my phone is around my neck in a waterproof case. Get it out of my head, type it in as a note, boom, go on with your day. Because I don't want it to be interrupting leisure time that I need. But I think it's more torturous to try to discipline yourself like that shouldn't be happening. That's like meditating. When you meditate, a good meditator leader will tell you you're not trying to abolish the thoughts. You're trying to acknowledge them and let them pass by like a floating cloud. So when you're self-employed and you are obsessed, just don't try to block it because it's a moot point. But how can you get it out of your head as quickly as possible and stay present with what you're doing personally?
Yeah, that's really good advice, because it is almost impossible to control the worrying in the background.
I think the worst thing you could do is fight it, because then you're self-criticizing yourself as well, and I think you're slowing yourself down.
Absolutely. We're here talking with Jeffrey Shaw. You can find him at jeffreyshaw.com, and his new book is called The Self-Employed Life. And if you want to make sure you never miss one of our weekly Thursday Newsweek interview shows, just go to dorieclark.com/LI. That stands for LinkedIn. And you can follow me there and get reminders. So, Jeff, we had a great question come in from Cheryl. Cheryl says, okay, once you know that you want to be self-employed, what do you do then? She says, my previous corporate work, for example, was very niche and not the kind of work that I want to continue doing. So if you were advising someone in Cheryl's situation, what would that look like?
Well, Cheryl, the way I'm interpreting your question, which is very common, is that you're trying to look for the next work. It sounds like, you don't necessarily want to continue to do the very niche work that you did to your company. So you're trying to find your best value. So here are some things that, again, as I said earlier, don't stress yourself out to the point that thinking it has to be perfect. You have to know what it is, because you're going to go through iterations. It's going to evolve on its own, but you need an inkling to begin with. I'm sure there's an area in an industry or maybe a field that you're interested in. Although honestly, I've had clients come to me for coaching that are complete blank slates. Like, I left my job. I have zero idea. Like one guy, I tell the story in the book, he left his own company after 15 years, came to me and said, I have no idea whatsoever what I want to create next. So I actually like the blank slate too. And what I look for is, and what you might want to look for is what first are some innate qualities and characteristics that you have that you actually can monetize. And it sounds crazy, but one thing I would suggest, and I often do as an exercise with my clients, is make a list of compliments that you have heard probably throughout your life, even at work, this job you're leaving. What is the thing that people have repeatedly said to you that they, maybe they come to you because you have a way of cutting to the chase. As I mentioned, I have somebody in my life that does that really well. Maybe they've mentioned to you that, you have a way of simplifying complicated problems. Their chances are, and having a photography background and having coached so many creatives, one of the primary reasons why many of us, particularly creatives, don't get paid their full value is because what they're really good at is so natural to them, they don't see the value in it. So it's really easy to brush off what's actually right in front of you could be your best monetization skill. So pay attention, like what's the feedback? What are the compliments you've received throughout your life? Pay particular to the ones that you're like, oh, that's so easy for me. It's probably worth a fortune to somebody else. That can begin to head you in the direction, because honestly, almost anything can be monetized. I'm not kidding. Like if you have a really clear idea and you can put it up against and position it in a way that it's either what the world needs, or you can bring something to the table the world doesn't even know it needs, but suddenly, like the client I had mentioned before about being a blank slate, we wound up creating for him a business around being a timeshare C-suite executive. He had so much knowledge in various C-suite positions, CEO, CMO, CFO, COO, you name it. So, but he didn't want a long-term commitment. So he's like the Uber of CEOs. Like he like fills in for companies that are in short-term need of a CEO, COO, CFO, CMO. He's got all the roles. And it gives him full autonomy to pick and choose the work he wants to do. Nothing's ever longer than a 6-month commitment. He won't take any contract longer than 6 months because he doesn't want to be that committed in his life. Okay. We made something out of nothing, but that is, if you came down to the true definition of entrepreneurship, it is making something out of nothing. So what is it that your innate qualities? I think it's a great place to start to see what you can create from that would be a good place to start.
Amen to that. We're here with Jeffrey Shaw. He's the author of the new book, The Self-Employed Life. If you're enjoying this conversation, hit the like button and hit the share button so that your friends and colleagues can see it and benefit from Jeff's wisdom as well. Now, Jeff, we have time for probably one more question. And I want to we'll turn back the clock and turn to your first book, which is called Lingo. And I think Lingo was so well done and interesting because fundamentally it's a book about how to get into the heads of and learn to speak the language of your customers. How does that work? And how does that actually tie into becoming successful if you are self-employed?
Yeah, so I look at Lingo as the evolution of customer avatars and buyer personas that have been the buzz in marketing all these years. But the problem is that most people do buyer personas at such a surface level. Nothing is more moving than making people feel like you completely get them, right? That's what Lingo is. Lingo is to know your customer, your client, those that you want to serve. It's to know them so well that you're tapping into their unspoken emotions, right? And it's both, there are certain generalizations and there are specifics, right? So there might be some generalizations about, like, as a photographer, I worked with the very affluent people. There were some generalized emotions about affluent people, that the way their values stacked up, that I understood. But then, of course, you want to nuance it for the specific, even geographical area, right? So, and I photographed entirely in location. Like the way I photographed people in the Northeast was very different than a place like California or Miami. People in the Northeast are kind of reserved about their wealth. They're not going to sit with the castle in the background. But people in Miami are like, show it all: the house, the yacht, the whole thing, right? So there were some generalizations, but there were nuances to the market in different areas. So Lingo is it's taking the time at any point in one's career, whether you're just starting out, been in business a long time, certainly after COVID, a good way of recovering is to take that pause time and consider how much people's values have shifted as a result of this world event. what was important to them a year ago, a year and a half ago, may not be remotely important to them today, and vice versa. What wasn't important to them now may be important to them now. Look at like how much sanitization is a big deal now, right? So it's understanding people's emotions. And in the book Lingo, I lay out actually a 5-step process, which is kind of tapping into the various emotional triggers. For example, one of those is familiarity. Like, people are drawn to the emotion of familiarity, like what feels like home to them emotionally. And if you can understand what feels like home to your clients, those that you serve, and recapture that feeling, they're drawn to it like a moth to a flame. But you have to understand, what emotions need to get conjured up to give people that feeling of familiarity, which in turn becomes them feeling like, oh my gosh, this business, this brand totally gets me. And that, when somebody feels that, price is irrelevant. Honestly, it's such a strong emotion. So that's what, and the practical side of it is then you turn that into your brand messaging. You put that out in the world as your beacon of light that you're putting out in the world. And it also becomes both your magnet and your filter. It will attract your ideal customers, and people that don't get it, like, that's great. They're not your customers and they'll stay away. So it's both a magnet and a filter.
Amazing. It's a powerful insight. We've been here with Jeffrey Shaw. He's the author of The Self-Employed Life, and his first book was called Lingo. You're already resonating with the marketplace, Jeff. Vince Jordan says, that was great. I just bought and look forward to your book, The Self-Employed Life.
Thank you, Vince.
So thank you for that. And thank you to everyone who has joined us here today. Again, if you have enjoyed the conversation, hit the like and share button, and you can learn more about Jeffrey and his work at his website. It's jeffreyshaw.com. And you can follow me and make sure you never miss one of our Newsweek weekly interviews on Thursday by signing up and downloading your free self-assessment at DorieClark.com. Thank you for being here, everyone. And thank you especially to Jeffrey Shaw.
My pleasure, Dorie. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. See you next week.